Random House Audio presents The King's Deception by Steve Barry, read for you by Scott Brick. Prologue. Whitehall Palace, January 28th, 1547. Catherine Parr saw that the end was approaching. Only a few days remained, maybe a mere few hours. She'd stood silent for the past half hour and watched as the physicians completed their examinations. The time had now come for them to deliver their verdict. "Sire," one of them said, "all human aid is now in vain. It is best for you to review your past life and seek God's mercy through Christ." She stared as Henry VIII considered the advice. The king, prone in his bed, had been uttering loud cries of pain. He ceased them and lifted his head, facing the messenger. "What judge has sent you to pass this sentence on me?" "We are your physicians. There is no appeal from this judgment." "Get away from me," Henry shrieked. "All of you." Though gravely ill, the king could still command. The men quickly fled the bedchamber, as did all of the frightened courtiers. Catherine turned to leave too. "I bid you, good queen, to stay," Henry said. She nodded. They were alone. He seemed to steel himself. "If a man fills his belly with venison and pork, with sides of beef and pasties of veal, if he washes them down with flood tides of ale and wine that never know neep," Henry paused, "he will reap his tares in a black hour. That, my queen, is how it is with me." Her husband spoke the truth. A malady of his own choosing had consumed him, one that had rotted him away from within. He was swollen to the point of bursting. "Sire, you speak ill of yourself without cause," she said. "You're my liege lord, to whom I and all of England owe absolute allegiance." "But only so long as I breathe." "Which you continue to do." He opened his bloated hand, and she laid hers within. His skin was cold and clammy, and she wondered if death had already begun to take hold. She knew him to be 56 years old, having reigned for nearly 38 years. He'd taken 6 wives and fathered 5 children, that he acknowledged. He'd challenged the world and defied the Catholic Church, establishing his own religion. She was the 3rd woman, named Catherine, whom he had married. No joy had come from being mated to this tyrant, but she'd fulfilled her duties, and now 4 years of marital agony were approaching an end. But she kept her face masked with concern, her eyes filled with what could only be perceived as love. "Sweetheart," the king whispered, "I have a final duty for you." She gave a nod. "Your Majesty's faintest wish is the law of this land." "There is a secret, one I have kept for a long time, one my father passed to me. I wish it passed to Edward, and ask you to do such." "It would be my honor to do anything for you." "At his death," the king said, "my father told me of a secret place, one only for Tudors. My son must know of it. Will you tell him, my queen?" "I would, of course, do whatever you request of me," she said. "But why not tell your dear son and heir yourself?" "He cannot see me like this. I have not allowed any of my children to see me like this. I must know that you will carry out this duty." She nodded again. "That is not in question." "Then listen to me." Cotton Malone knew a lie would be better, but decided, as part of his new cooperative relationship with his ex-wife, to tell the truth. Pam watched him with an intensity he'd seen on her face before, only this time her eyes were softened by a difficult reality. He knew something she didn't. "What does the death of Henry VIII have to do with what happened to you 2 years ago?" she asked him. He'd started to tell her the story, but stopped. He hadn't thought about those hours in London in a long while. A father and son experience only an ex-agent for the United States Justice Department could survive. "The other day, Gary and I were watching the news," Pam said. "A Libyan terrorist, the one who bombed that plane in Scotland back in the 1980s, died of cancer. Gary said he knew all about him." He'd seen the same story. Abdelbasit al-Megrahi had finally succumbed. He wanted to know, what else did Gary say? Only that in London you two were involved with that terrorist. Not exactly true, but he was proud of his son's hedging. "All I know," she said, "is that 2 years ago Gary left here with you for a Thanksgiving break in Copenhagen. Instead, now I learn he was in London. Neither one of you ever said a word about that." "You knew I had to make a stop there on the way home." "A stop? Sure. But it was more than that, and you know it." They'd been divorced going on 4 years. Before that, they'd been married 18 years. His entire naval career had been spent with Pam. He became a lawyer and started with the Justice Department while with her, but he ended his 12-year career as a Magellan billet agent, as her ex-husband. And it had not been a good separation. But they'd finally worked things out 2 years ago, just before all that happened in London. Maybe she should be told everything. "You sure you want to hear this?" They were sitting at the kitchen table inside the Atlanta house where Pam and Gary had moved before the divorce. Just after the marriage ended, he'd left Georgia and moved to Denmark, thinking he'd left the past behind. How wrong could someone be? Did he want to hear what happened again? Not really. But it might be good for them both. Okay, I'll tell you. Part 1, 2 years ago. Chapter 1, London, Friday, November 21st, 6:25 p.m. Cotton Malone stepped up to the customs window at Heathrow Airport and presented 2 passports, his own and his son Gary's. Positioned between himself and the glass-enclosed counter, however, stood a problem. 15-year-old Ian Dunn. "This one doesn't have a passport," he told the attendant, then explained who he was and what he was doing. A brief call to somebody led to verbal approval for Ian to re-enter the country, which didn't surprise Malone. He assumed that since the Central Intelligence Agency wanted the boy in England, they'd make the necessary arrangements. He was tired from the long flight. His knee still hurt from the kick Ian had delivered in Atlanta before trying to flee from that airport. Luckily, his own 15-year-old, Gary, had been quick to tackle the pesky Scot before he'd escaped the concourse. Favors for friends. Always a problem. This one for his former boss, Stephanie Nell, at the Magellan billet. "It's the CIA," she'd told him. Langley had called directly. Somehow they were aware Malone was in Georgia and wanted him to escort the boy back to London, handing him over to the Metropolitan Police. After that, he and Gary could head on to Copenhagen. In return, they'd received first-class tickets all the way home to Denmark. 4 days ago, he'd flown to Georgia for 2 reasons. The State Bar of Georgia required 12 hours of continuing legal education from all of its licensed lawyers. He'd chosen a seminar in Atlanta on international law. The second reason was personal. Gary had asked to spend the Thanksgiving holiday with him. School was out, and his ex-wife Pam thought an overseas trip a good idea. He'd wondered...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?